You walked through the front door and the house was full. Voices, laughter, the smell of food on the stove. And somehow, in the middle of all of it, you felt the specific, surgical loneliness of being completely unseen. Not ignored, not disrespected, just invisible in a way that is far more devastating than any argument could ever be. You set your keys down and nobody turned around. You asked a question and the conversation kept moving like your words were made of vapor. And the most heartbreaking part of that moment was not the silence that met you. It was that you were not even surprised. You had learned to expect that silence the way a person learns to expect rain in a grey November sky. That expectation had settled into your bones so quietly that you stopped calling it loneliness and started calling it normal. But normal is not the same thing as true. And what you have been living inside that house, around that table, in the middle of those celebrations that somehow always managed to leave you on the outside looking in, that was never the definition of who you are. It was the definition of where you were placed. There is a staggering difference between those two things, and the enemy has spent years trying to collapse that distinction inside your mind, trying to convince you that the environment you were born into was a verdict about your value. It was not. It was a training ground. And no one sends their most critical, most necessary, most carefully prepared soldier into a comfortable environment. They send them into the one that will forge exactly the character the assignment requires. Think about what it takes to smile at a table where you are invisible. Think about the sheer internal discipline it requires to keep showing up, to keep choosing love over resentment, to keep offering your presence to people who do not seem to register it. The world calls that weakness. Heaven calls it one of the rarest forms of strength it has ever witnessed. Because anyone can love the people who love them back beautifully, but to remain open, to remain kind, to refuse bitterness while sitting inside a loneliness that has no name, that is the formation of a soul that God can trust with something enormous. That is why in the trilogy, The 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life, the link is in the pinned comment, I explain exactly how God uses the pain of invisibility not to punish you, but to protect you. To guard the depth of your calling until your character is wide enough to carry it without being crushed by it. If you have been feeling this ache, this soul-deep question of why you were placed where you were placed, you need to watch that material. It will reframe everything. Now let us go deeper into the table itself, into the dinner, the holiday gathering, the birthday party that was supposed to feel like belonging and instead felt like attending a play where everyone else knew their lines and you were handed the wrong script. You learned to perform the smile. You learned the precise angle of enthusiasm that satisfies just enough to prevent questions. You passed the dish, laughed at the joke, nodded at the story you have heard 17 times, and all the while something inside your chest was pressing against your ribs like a bird that knows it was born for open sky, but has spent its entire life in a cage shaped exactly like a living room. The food tasted fine. The noise was warm enough. But you were not there. The real you, the deep you, the you that carries a calling too vast for that room to contain. That part of you was somewhere else entirely, pressed against a ceiling no one else in that room could see. And then came the bathroom, or the shower, or the car on the way home, the moment when the performance could finally end and the real weight of it could surface. You have cried in places specifically chosen for their privacy, not because you were ashamed of the tears, but because you had already learned that releasing them in public only generated questions you did not have the energy to answer. So you let the water run and you let the grief come. And it came not in elegant waves, but in the ugly, fractured, breathless way that real grief always comes when it has been compressed for too long. Your body was doing what your spirit had been forbidden to do all evening. It was releasing the honest testimony of what it actually feels like to love people who cannot see you. That cry was sacred, even if no one witnessed it, especially because no one witnessed it. Because here is what happens in the unseen architecture of heaven when a chosen soul cries in isolation. It is not ignored. It is not categorized as self-pity and set aside. Every single tear that has fallen from your eyes in a private place, every sound you swallowed before it could become a sob, every night you pressed your face into a pillow rather than let the people around you see what their blindness was costing you, God caught every single one of them. The scripture does not say he approximately keeps track. It says he stores them. That is the language of someone who considers each one irreplaceable. And in the economy of heaven, that kind of hidden grief, that kind of faithfulness in suffering, is the raw material from which spiritual authority is built. The physical weight of that loneliness is real. It is not metaphor. It lives in the stomach, a dull pressure just below the sternum that flares up at family events and does not fully leave until you are back in your own space. It lives in the shoulders, which carry the invisible burden of always being the one who holds it together so that no one else has to. It lives in the jaw, which has learned to lock down the words that would be honest but costly, the questions that would clarify but cost too much peace to ask. Your body has been keeping score of every year you spent performing belonging instead of experiencing it. And that score is not evidence of your weakness. It is evidence of the profound faithfulness you have demonstrated under conditions that most people would not have survived without becoming someone unrecognizable. The social architecture of the family system you were born into was not designed to see you. It was designed before you arrived, built from patterns and agreements and unspoken rules that preceded your birth by generations. You came in carrying something that had never moved through that bloodline before. A sensitivity, a depth, a capacity for spiritual perception that the system had no category for. And systems do not know how to respond to what they cannot categorize, so they respond with dismissal, with redirection, with the subtle but consistent message that the thing you are carrying is too much, too strange, too different from what has always been done here. They were not cruel. Most of them. They were simply faithfully reproducing the only reality they knew. But you were not born to reproduce that reality. You were born to end it. That is the loneliness that has no clean name, the loneliness of being the first to ask the question, the first to break the silence, the first to refuse the inheritance of smallness that was handed down with love, wrapped in tradition, offered as wisdom. The first to feel in your body the wrongness of patterns that everyone else had accepted as simply the way things are. That loneliness is not a wound, it is a calling card. It is the specific ache of someone standing at the precise boundary between what a bloodline has always been and what it is about to become. You are not lost, you are on the frontier, and frontiers are always lonely before they become communities. Now let us speak about what your difference does to the people around you. Not what you imagine it does, not the polite version, but the honest spiritual diagnosis of what actually happens in a room when someone who carries genuine light sits down at a table full of people who have chosen comfort over transformation. Your presence does not merely go unnoticed. It irritates, it disturbs. Not because you are doing anything wrong, but because light, by its nature, makes darkness visible, and darkness does not enjoy being made visible. When you walk into a room carrying the frequency you carry, something in the people whose wounds have never been addressed begins to vibrate uncomfortably. They cannot name it. They experience it as an irrational irritation with you specifically. You are too sensitive, they say. You think too much. You make everything complicated. What they mean underneath all of that is, your presence makes it impossible for me to pretend that I am fine, and I have organized my entire life around pretending that I am fine, and I need you to stop. That irritation masquerades as concern. It wraps itself in the costume of advice. The criticism comes with a tone of care. I'm only telling you this because I love you, and so you receive it doubting yourself rather than doubting the source. You have spent years quietly wondering if they were right, if perhaps you were too much, if the thing that felt most authentically you was actually the problem that everyone else had the grace to point out. And that wondering, that slow, corrosive self-doubt, was not born of honest self-examination. It was born of absorbing the discomfort of people who needed you to be smaller so they could remain comfortable. Their discomfort was never your evidence. It was their confession. The pattern of hidden envy disguised as counsel is one of the most sophisticated weapons that can be used against a person of genuine calling. Because it does not feel like an attack. It feels like a relationship. It comes from mouths that also speak kindness, from people who also show up in moments of genuine need, from voices you have learned to trust because they have been consistent. And precisely because the source is trusted, the message lands deeper. When a stranger dismisses your calling, you can shake it off. When someone at the table where you grew up dismisses it, someone who knows your name, who has seen you at your lowest, who has access to every insecurity you have ever expressed, that dismissal finds purchase in places that a stranger's criticism never could. This is not an accident. The enemy is a strategist, and he uses familiar voices because familiar voices bypass the defenses that protect you from strangers. You have felt this in your body. The specific defeat of having your dream minimized by someone who is supposed to believe in you more than anyone. The way that minimization does not just land in the mind, but drops down into the stomach, into that tender place where your most honest hopes live. The way it makes the dream feel suddenly fragile, suddenly presumptuous, suddenly like something you perhaps invented rather than something that was given to you. That feeling is a lie delivered through a human instrument. The dream was real before they spoke. It is real after they spoke. Their inability to see it is a limitation of their vision, not a feature of the dream. As I teach deeply in the material, The 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life, I left the link for you in the pinned comment. This pain is one of the most reliable signs that your assignment is genuine. The enemy does not bother suppressing ordinary things. He deploys his most sophisticated instruments of discouragement against the very targets whose breakthrough he is most desperate to prevent. The intensity of what has come against you is a measurement of what is ahead of you. Read that again slowly. Let it recalibrate the way you have been interpreting your suffering, because when you trace the lineage of this pattern, the misunderstood dreamer, the one rejected by his own people, the one whose gifts were weaponized against him before they were celebrated, you find a story that heaven has told before. A boy whose brothers could not tolerate the dreams he carried, who stripped him of the coat that represented his distinction and sold him for the price of convenience, who landed in a house not his own and served with faithfulness that the record books preserved even while the humans around him forgot his name, who was accused falsely by the very people he served with integrity, who sat in a prison cell with nothing but the character that his hidden years had built, and who emerged not broken, but equipped. Joseph did not become Pharaoh's second because he had survived. He became Pharaoh's second because the pit, the house, and the prison had together done the precise interior work that the palace required. Every stage of his rejection was a stage of his preparation. David knew it too. The shepherd field is where the lion and the bear were defeated, and no one watched those battles. No award was given, no acknowledgement arrived. He killed the lion in obscurity and the bear in obscurity, and developed in obscurity the hand and the courage and the trust in God that would one day be his weapon against Goliath on a stage that all of Israel watched. But the public victory was only possible because of the private ones. And Jesus, who looked nothing like what the religious establishment expected their deliverer to look like, who came from the wrong town, from the wrong family by their assessment, who spoke in ways that unsettled the comfortable and welcomed the people the system had already discarded. He too was dismissed and mocked and accused and ultimately murdered by the very people he came to save. And on the third day, heaven answered every verdict that humanity had rendered. The same vindication that moved on Joseph's behalf, the same promotion that interrupted David's obscurity, the same resurrection that reversed the sentence pronounced on Jesus, that same power is already moving in your story, not as a distant promise, as a present reality operating underneath the surface of everything you can currently see. The architecture of your deliverance is being assembled in real time, in the invisible realm, and the evidence is already appearing at the edges of your natural world if you have the eyes to look for it. You have felt it, the unexpected favor from someone who had no reason to extend it, the door that opened in a direction you were not even looking, the provision that arrived through a route you never mapped, the conversation that happened without your engineering it, that somehow covered exactly the territory you had been praying about in private. These are not coincidences. There is no such thing as coincidence in the life of someone who has been forged the way you have been forged. These are the first visible movements of a vindication that was decided in heaven long before you were ready to receive it. Now let us speak honestly about the removal, because some of what has felt like loss in this season was not loss at all. It was surgery. God is a precise and compassionate surgeon, and he does not remove what is healthy, but he absolutely removes what is infected. And some of the relationships, the environments, the communities that you have grieved the departure of, their leaving was not abandonment, it was protection. The people who could not see your value were not simply failing to celebrate you. They were actively, if unconsciously, participating in a system designed to keep your ceiling low enough to manage. Every person who dismissed you, who minimized you, who made you feel that your dream was a delusion, their exit from your life was God removing a ceiling. You have been grieving the ceiling. You should have been celebrating the sky. Lot's wife understood the deliverance. She walked out of the burning city. She felt the ground under her feet that was not on fire. She had been given the gift of removal from a place that was actively destroying everything it touched. And she turned around, not because she was evil, not because she was foolish in every other way, but because the familiar fire, even when it is destructive, has a gravitational pull that the new territory does not yet have. The new territory is unfamiliar. The new territory does not have the emotional grooves worn into it by decades of repeated experience. The new territory asks something of you that the old territory never did. It asks you to trust that what is ahead is worth more than what you are leaving behind, even when ahead looks like open ground and behind looks like everything you have ever known. Do not turn around. The approval you are tempted to look back toward was never actually feeding you. It was a simulation of nourishment that kept you alive enough to stay, but never well enough to grow. Every time you returned to those relationships, seeking the validation they had already demonstrated they could not provide, every time you went back to the table hoping this time it would be different, your stomach confirmed what your spirit already knew. It was not different. It was the same, because the source had not changed. And you, beloved, were not designed to be sustained by a source that diminishes you every time you return to it. The fear of the new is real. Let us not be dishonest about that. After years, sometimes decades, of invisibility, the prospect of being seen is not simple relief. It is terrifying in a way that is difficult to explain to someone who has not lived it. You have built an identity, even a comfort, around not being noticed. Invisibility is painful, but it is also predictable. It does not require you to perform at the level of your calling. It does not expose you to the possibility of public failure. It does not demand that you become the full version of yourself, which is simultaneously the most thrilling and the most frightening thing you can imagine. And so perfectionism arrives, dressed in the costume of wisdom, suggesting that you are simply not ready yet. That if you wait a little longer, prepare a little more, heal a little further, then you will be ready. That is the voice of the cage. The people who need what you carry do not need you perfect. They need you present. The chains you are breaking are not just yours. This is the understanding that changes everything about the way you interpret your pain. Every pattern you interrupt in your own body, every generational agreement you refuse to renew, every cycle of invisibility or smallness or silence that ends with you, that ending reverberates backward and forward through your bloodline in ways that the natural mind cannot fully map. The children who will come after you will inherit a different default. They will grow up in a family system where someone once stood at the boundary between what was and what was supposed to be, and chose the latter. That someone was you. The sacrifice of your hidden years, the cost of your separation, the loneliness of being the first, all of it was intercession. You were praying with your life for people you have not yet met. And the new tribe is coming. It is already assembling, drawn by the same frequency you have been broadcasting, scattered across the same wilderness you have been navigating, arriving at the same crossroads from different roads that all lead to the same field. They will recognize you without needing an introduction. They will celebrate the exact things that your family of origin could not understand. They will not be intimidated by your depth. They will be relieved by it, the way a person who has been speaking their private language alone their entire life is relieved to finally find someone who answers back in the same tongue. You are not going to have to perform for them. You are going to get to arrive. That arrival is not in the distant future. The transition is happening now, in this season, in the very discomfort of everything that is rearranging around you. The relationships that are ending, the spaces that are closing, the restlessness that will not let you settle back into the old containers. These are not signs that something is going wrong. They are contractions, and contractions mean that something new is about to enter the world. Not gradually, not eventually. Now, the breaking of the old is simultaneous with the birth of the new. You are not losing a life, you are being delivered into one. The provision that is coming is not for indulgence, it is for freedom. Freedom to pursue the assignment without the survival anxiety that has split your attention for so long. Freedom to be as generous as the God who has been sustaining you through every dry season has been generous with you. Freedom to stop spending your most creative hours in environments that were never designed for your gifts and start spending them in the work that your hidden years were preparing you for. The resources are already in motion. The connections are already being arranged. The doors are already being unlocked. And when they open, and they will open, you will not step through them as someone who barely survived the wilderness. You will step through them as someone who was built in it. Your voice has weight now that it did not have before the hidden years. Not because you earned it through suffering. That is not how this works. But because character is the only foundation that can hold the full structure of what you have been given to build. The gift without the character destroys the carrier. You have seen it happen to people who were promoted before they were prepared. The platform became a prison. The visibility became a verdict. The applause became an addiction that filled none of the emptiness. God protected you from that fate. The hiddenness was not punishment. It was the careful, loving protection of a father who knew exactly what was coming and refused to bring you to it before you could stand under its weight without being crushed. You are a cycle breaker. Say that plainly, without apology, and let it land where it is meant to land. The patterns of silence that have moved through your family for generations, the unspoken grief, the unexpressed gifts, the callings that were buried under the weight of practicality and fear, and the inherited wisdom that it is safer to stay small. Those patterns end with you, not because you are better than those who came before you, but because you were the one placed at the inflection point. You were the one given enough separation from the pattern to see it for what it is. You were the one whose pain became precise enough to name it, and whose healing is becoming powerful enough to break it. That is not arrogance. That is your assignment. The healing that is moving in your body right now. The slow loosening of the chronic tension, the quiet return of desires that the exhaustion of invisibility had suppressed. The growing ability to feel your own presence as something worth protecting. That is not just personal recovery, it is the beginning of your authority. Healed people do not just feel better. They become dangerous to every system that depends on people staying wounded. Your wholeness is an act of warfare. Your freedom is a prophecy, and every step you take toward the fullness of who you were made to be is a step that rewrites the story for everyone still sitting at the table where you once sat, aching the same ache, asking the same question, wondering if God even remembers their name. He does. He always did. He remembered your name in the pit. He remembered it in the prison. He remembered it in every shower where you cried alone, and every dinner where you performed contentment, and every night you chose faithfulness when bitterness would have been so much easier and so much more understandable. He was never absent from a single moment of your hidden season. He was in it with you, forging the very character that will make your promotion permanent rather than precarious. And now the season is shifting. The wilderness is behind you. The promised land is not a distant dream. It is the territory you are actively crossing into, one faithful step at a time, one broken chain at a time, one healed layer at a time. Step forward, chosen one. Not when you feel ready, not when the fear is gone, not when the approval finally arrives from the people who were never going to give it. Step forward now, precisely as you are. Precisely as imperfect and uncertain and still healing as you feel in this moment. The people who need what you carry are waiting. The assignment that was written before your name was given is already active. The vindication that heaven set in motion before you were born into that family. Before you sat at that table, before you cried in that shower, it is already here. Your only job is to stop looking back at the fire and to walk into the open field that has been waiting for you all along. If you study the trilogy, The 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life, which link is in the pinned comment, you will see that everything you have walked through, every year of invisibility, every dismissed dream, every tear absorbed by silence, was not wasted. It was invested. And the return on that investment is arriving now, in this season for you specifically. Go to the pinned comment. Get the material. Because the next chapter of your story deserves a foundation as solid as the character you have already built in the dark. The link is there. The door is open. And you, chosen one, were always meant to walk through it. And yet, even as the door stands open, there is one final interior threshold you must cross before your feet find the new ground fully. It is the threshold of self-permission. Not permission granted by a parent who finally sees you. Not permission issued by a sibling who finally acknowledges what you carry. Not the validation of a family system that spent years looking past you. Self-permission. The sovereign, God-backed decision that you make in the privacy of your own chest, that you are allowed to be fully what you were made to be without apology, without the constant backward glance toward people who needed you smaller to feel comfortable around you. This permission cannot be given to you from the outside. It has to be chosen from the inside. And it has to be chosen repeatedly, on the days when the old voices return, on the mornings when the doubt resurfaces, on the evenings when the loneliness of the frontier feels less like calling and more like abandonment. You choose it again and again, until the choosing becomes the most natural thing about you. Because here is what no one tells you about the transition from the wilderness to the promised land. It does not feel the way you imagined it would feel. You spent years in the hidden season fantasizing about the moment of vindication, building an internal picture of what it would look like when everything finally aligned, when the people who dismissed you finally saw, when the doors finally opened and the rooms finally held space for everything you carry. And the reality of it when it begins to unfold is simultaneously more and less than the fantasy. It is less dramatic than the image you constructed in your most desperate prayers. There is no single thunderclap moment, no cinematic reversal where every person who doubted you assembles to witness your promotion. Instead, it comes in quieter pieces, a conversation that shifts something permanent, an opportunity that arrives without announcement, a moment when you hear yourself speaking and realize that the voice coming out of you no longer sounds like someone asking permission. It sounds like someone who already knows they belong in the room. And that quiet, undramatic, profound moment of interior arrival is more glorious than any fantasy you ever constructed, because it is real. The real is what you have been fighting for through every hidden year. Not the performance of success, not the appearance of wholeness, the actual, cellular, soul-deep reality of a life that matches the calling that was placed inside you before your first breath. And that reality is built not in a single moment of vindication, but in the accumulation of faithful days, each one adding another layer of foundation beneath the structure that God has been designing since before your name was spoken into existence. You are not behind, you are not late, you are arriving precisely on the schedule that a sovereign God designed for a purpose too specific and too important to be rushed by anyone's impatience, including your own. Now receive this deeply, in the place where the ache has lived for so long. The people who could not see you were not the authority on your value. They were simply limited by the measure of their own healing, the width of their own vision, the capacity of a system that had never been required to expand to hold someone like you. Their limitation was never your verdict. It was their condition. And you can hold compassion for their condition without allowing their condition to continue defining your ceiling. You can love them without being managed by them. You can honor the relationships that were genuine without returning to the roles those relationships required you to play. Love does not demand that you make yourself invisible to maintain it. The love that requires your smallness is not actually love. It is a transaction dressed in love's clothing, and you have paid that price long enough. The new connections coming into your life will feel different in a way that might initially be disorienting. You will wait for the cost, the hidden requirement, the eventual diminishment, the moment when the acceptance reveals its conditions, and it will not come. Because the people God is positioning around you in this next season have been forged in their own wilderness, shaped by their own hidden years, and they carry the same internal knowledge that you carry. That genuine relationship does not cost you your identity. They will celebrate